Good evening, I'm Alma Angeles, and you're watching Eagle News International on tonight's headlines. Russia said it's pulling back some of its forces near the Ukrainian border to their bases in what would be the first major step towards de-escalation in weeks of crisis with the West. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau invokes rarely used emergency powers to bring an end to trucker-led protests against COVID health rules after police arrested 11 people with a cache of firearms blocking a border crossing with the U.S. The World Health Organization calls for increased vaccination efforts in Eastern Europe, warning that an Omicron tidal wave was heading eastwards. And the U.S. Department of Agriculture said it had detected bird flu in 2 more farms after a first case came to light last week, putting the industry on guard. First in our news, Russia said it was pulling back some of its forces near the Ukrainian border to their bases in what would be the first major step towards de-escalation in weeks of crisis with the West. Igor Konashenkov told Russian news agency that units of the southern and western military districts, having completed their tasks, have already begun loading onto rail and road transport, and today they will begin moving to their military garrisons. Take a look.
По мере окончания мероприятий боевой подготовки войска, как и всегда, совершат марши комбинированным способом в пункты постоянной дислокации. Подразделения Южного и Западного военных округов, выполнившие задачи, уже приступили к погрузке на железнодорожный и автомобильный транспорт и сегодня начнут движение в свои воинские гарнизоны.
Now, it wasn't immediately clear how many units were involved and what impact the withdrawals would have on the overall number of troops surrounding Ukraine. The move came amid an intense diplomatic effort to avert a feared Russian invasion of its pro-Western neighbor, and after Moscow amassed more than 100,000 troops near Ukraine's borders. The crisis, the worst between Russia and the West since the end of the Cold War, reached a peak this week with U.S. officials warning that a full-scale invasion, including an assault on the capital Kiev, was possible within days. Volodymyr Zelensky hosted German Chancellor Olaf Scholz. Let's listen in.
Der Vorbereitetheit der EU und der NATO von Deutschland und den USA zum Beispiel zweifeln im Hinblick auf das, was zu tun ist, wenn es zu einer militärischen Aggression gegen die Ukraine kommt. Wir werden dann handeln und es werden sehr weitreichende Maßnahmen sein, die erheblichen Einfluss auf die ökonomischen Entwicklungsmöglichkeiten Russlands hätten. Jetzt.
The 350 troop reinforcements promised by Germany began arriving in NATO ally Lithuania amid regional tensions over Russia's troop buildup around Ukraine. Germany already has around 550 soldiers stationed in Lithuania and leads the NATO multinational battalion there. But Germany refuses to provide weapons to Ukraine. And in public, Scholz will not threaten the Russian-German gas pipeline, the Nord Stream 2, if Russia invades. Meanwhile, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov told President Putin that there is a chance to agree on security with the West.
Мы предупреждаем о недопустимости бесконечного ведения разговоров на вопросы, которые требуют решения сегодня. Но все-таки, наверное, будучи главой МИДа, я должен сказать, что шанс есть всегда.
Все-таки есть шанс договориться с нашими партнерами по ключевым вопросам, вызывающими нашу озабоченность. Или это просто попытка втянуть нас в бесконечный переговорный процесс, не имеющий никакого логического завершения.
Наши возможности далеко не исчерпаны. Они, конечно, не должны продолжаться бесконечно, но на данном этапе я бы предложил их продолжать и наращивать.
Military launched its own exercises. U.S. officials alleged Russia has put in place Operatives trained in explosives to carry out a false flag operation to create a pretext to invade Ukraine. But Russia quickly denied the account, with Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov calling the U.S. statements unfounded. Meanwhile, the United States is offering up to $1 billion in credit guarantees to help Ukraine weather the threat of war against Russia, according to U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken. Blinken said the offer would bolster Ukraine's ability to ensure economic stability, growth, and prosperity for its people in the face of Russia's destabilizing behavior. The U.S. said Monday it doesn't believe Russian leader Vladimir Putin has made a final decision on whether to invade Ukraine, but he could move with little or no warning. Take a look.
We have shared with our allies and partners, and that includes Ukraine, our assessment of the information that we've been receiving, and certainly have reflected in those conversations our deep concern about the continued capabilities that Mr. Putin has at his beck and call. So I won't get into a specific date. I don't think that would be smart. I would just tell you that it is entirely possible that he could move with little to no warning.
Now, the $1 billion in credit guarantees would make it far easier and likely cheaper for Ukraine's government to borrow money. Ukraine is one of the poorest countries in Europe, and its corruption-plagued economy has suffered from heightened tensions over the possibility of an invasion by Russia, which has sent over 100,000 troops. U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan briefed congressional leaders Monday on the plan, according to a source familiar with the matter. In addition to economic and humanitarian aid, the U.S. has provided Ukraine with $650 million in military assistance over the past year. G7 countries have also warned Moscow they are ready to impose sanctions that would have a huge and immediate impact on Russia's economy should it pursue any further military aggression against Ukraine. Meanwhile, U.S. State Department spokesman Ned Price said that the United States has seen no tangible sign of de-escalation at the Russia-Ukraine border. Take a look.
Let me start by what we're not saying. We are not saying that President Putin has made a final decision. We have not communicated otherwise to our partners. We believe that diplomacy continues to be viable. We believe that there still remains a window to resolve this through dialogue and diplomacy. We are open to dialogue, but again, in order for that dialogue to lead to anything, in order for it to be effective, it would need to take place in the context of de-escalation. Right now, the Russian military buildup along Ukraine's borders, along Ukraine's borders and in Belarus, has created a very tense and challenging situation. It is a very dangerous situation that could escalate, whether intentional or not, with little or no warning.
Now, citing a dramatic acceleration in the buildup of Russian forces around Ukraine, Secretary of State Antony Blinken announced that the U.S. is relocating its embassy in Kiev to the western Ukrainian city of Lviv. Meanwhile, China said today that it opposes indiscriminate use of international sanctions, which will exacerbate division and confrontation, as the G7 warned Moscow of sanctions over the Ukraine crisis. Take a look.
当前的形势下，渲染炒作战争不是一种负责任的行为，一味制裁施压也无助于局势的缓和。 鼓吹集团对抗，更是重走冷战的老路。
The United States on Monday called China's tacit support for Moscow in the Ukrainian standoff deeply alarming, as Western powers fear an imminent Russian invasion of the ex-Soviet state. Ukrainian teenager Mikhailo Anopa had sleepless nights worrying about a full-on attack from Russia. And then he decided to do something about it. He and other boys from disadvantaged families started digging trenches for soldiers facing off with Russian-backed separatists. Take a look.
Ну, недалеко от этого поселка находятся военные позиции, в которых находятся наши военные. И мы как бы в случае артобстрела, нападения России на Украину, мы помогаем военным очищать эти окопы и все их позиции, чтобы они могли занять и защитить село и Украину.
И атаки на Киев. Если они это говорят, значит, у них есть для этого своя аргументация. С кем я прощался, говорил о двух вариантах. Может быть так. Потому что демоны...
Ну, в этом поселке 3 подвала. Мы готовим, чтобы в случае артобстрела все жители поселка собрались в этих подвалах, чтобы как-то пережить этот артобстрел, как-то выжить.
Дети много смеются, улыбаются, играют, но там под этим всем огромные страхи. То есть по мере своих сил детвора старается поддерживать защитников страны, потому что в буквальном смысле слова они все их детство прошло за спинами солдат в нескольких сотнях метров от наших домов. 8 лет из окна детской спальни в моем доме видна линия фронта. Вот. Помните, мы говорили о микробах.
And the news continues here on Eagle News. We'll be right back.
Welcome to Mobile Legends!
Mula noon hanggang ngayon, gabay natin ang MTRCB ratings sa matalino at responsableng panonood. Sa tamang pagsunod sa MTRCB ratings, ginagawa nating ligtas at makabuluhan ang panonood ng bawat miyembro ng pamilyang Pilipino. Lumipas man ang panahon, hanggang may pamilyang Pilipino, andyan ang MTRCB.
Welcome back. Israel's Prime Minister Naftali Bennett met with Bahrain's Jewish community after arriving for the first visit by an Israeli head of government to the Gulf country, 17 months after they defied decades of tensions to normalize ties. Take a look.
Israel with goodwill, with warm friendship between the two people, and I'm sure you can be a remarkable bridge between Bahrain and Israel.
Now, Bennett the Israeli Prime Minister was welcomed by Bahrain's Foreign Minister Abdulatif bin Rashid Al Zayani at Manama Airport, which was decorated with the flags of both countries late on Monday. He will meet with King Hamad and Crown Prince Salman, who is also Prime Minister, on Tuesday today. Bennett's visit is the latest such initiative following the U.S. brokered 2020 Abraham Accords, which ran counter to the long-standing Arab consensus that rolled out ties with Israel in the absence of a solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Bahrain and its close ally, the United Arab Emirates, became only the third and fourth Arab states, following Egypt and Jordan, to establish ties with Israel when they signed on to the pacts negotiated under U.S. President Donald Trump. Bennett visited the UAE in December. The visit also comes at a time of regional tensions over Iran's nuclear program. Iran is engaged in negotiations with Britain, China, France, Germany, and Russia, directly, and with the U.S. indirectly, to revive the deal formally called the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. Bennett's government strongly opposes a return to the 2015 agreement, warning repeatedly that lifting sanctions against Iran would give it more money to buy weapons for use against Israelis. In other news, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau invoked the rarely used emergency powers to bring an end to trucker-led protests against COVID health rules after police arrested 11 people with a cache of firearms blocking a border crossing with the U.S. It marked only the second time in Canadian history such powers have been invoked in peacetime, and came as hundreds of big rigs still clogged the streets of the capital, Ottawa, as well as two border crossings. Take a look.
The federal government has invoked the Emergencies Act to supplement provincial and territorial capacity to address the blockades and occupations. I want to be very clear. The scope of these measures will be time-limited, geographically targeted, as well as reasonable and proportionate to the threats they are meant to address. Those people have gone from protesting and disagreeing with those measures to limiting and blocking the freedoms of their fellow citizens, hurting jobs, hurting lives and livelihoods, endangering public safety, and weakening our country not just right now, but for times to come in the eyes of our most important trading partners.
The Emergencies Act was previously used by Trudeau's father, former Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau, during the October crisis of 1970. The Freedom Convoy started with Canadian truckers protesting against mandatory vaccines to cross the border between Canada and the United States. Meanwhile, the Premier of Ontario announced that he will lift vaccine passport requirements in the Canadian province, the epicenter of the protests against COVID-19 health measures. Take a look.
Over the weekend, I received recommendations from Dr. Moore on a plan to safely reopen our economy and remove Ontario's vaccine passport system. I've accepted these recommendations. Today, I can announce that beginning on February 17th, we will remove all capacity limits except for sporting events, concert venues, and theaters, which will be capped at 50%. Effective March the 1st, we intend to eliminate capacity limits in all indoor public settings. At the same time, and at the recommendation of Dr. Moore, we will lift proof of vaccination requirements for all settings.
The lifting of the health measures has been called for by demonstrators who have been occupying the nation's capital, Ottawa, located in Ontario, for more than 2 weeks. Police on Sunday cleared protesters blocking the Ambassador Bridge between Windsor, Ontario, and the U.S. city of Detroit, a key trade link. Protesters, however, continue to clog crossings in Alberta and Manitoba with trucks and farm equipment. Ontario is Canada's populous province and, like other jurisdictions, had reimposed at the end of December among the most restrictive health measures in the world. Meanwhile, thousands of Israelis streamed into Jerusalem from across the country Monday in a freedom convoy against coronavirus restrictions that mirrored similar traffic blocking protests in Canada and around the world. The demonstrators blared their car horns, waved Canadian flags, Canadian and Israeli flags, as they made their way towards the seat of Israel's government. Take a look.
So it's a it's the most important fight we will ever have. It's the world is in the worst situation for health of humanity.
The Jerusalem convoy snarled traffic in a demonstration similar to a massive show of protest in Canada that caused a major U.S.-Canada crossing to be shut for days. Similar movements have sprung up in France, the Netherlands, Switzerland, Australia, and New Zealand. Israel was one of the first nations to roll out a national vaccine campaign with third and fourth booster shots available to offset the vaccine's gradual decline in efficacy. Authorities in Israel have loosened restrictions in recent weeks, shortening the list of places where a vaccine pass is required. And this comes as runaway infections, fueled by the highly transmissible Omicron strain, seem to be slowing down. Meanwhile, the French presidency hosted an informal council of EU trade ministers in Marseille. Ministers met with WTO Director General Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala to discuss trade issues, including vaccines. Take a look.
Already yesterday, we had discussions with WTO Director General Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala on the preparations of the 12th Ministerial Conference of the WTO and the challenges we are facing. I think it's helps also to clarify the scene and set the EU position on various key deliverables.
And speaking as a politician, but also as a doctor, I'm really disappointed that we haven't come to an international agreement yet on vaccines, because there are so many countries in the world, like mine, that are heavily vaccinated and life is almost back to normal, but so many countries, particularly in the developing world, where people can't get vaccines yet. And I don't think we should wait for the next variant before we have an agreement. So I think there was a bit of impetus last night, which was encouraging. You know, I think the EU proposal is a very good one, and it's comprehensive. It's not just about compulsory licensing. It's about making sure that we help developing countries to build up manufacturing capacity, distribution capacity. We can have enough vaccines but not be able to get them into people's arms. So the European Union has always been in favour of a holistic approach.
Meanwhile, the World Health Organization called for increased vaccination efforts in Eastern Europe, warning that an Omicron tidal wave was heading eastwards. Take a look. Now, the World Health Organization's regional director, Hans Klug, noted that in the last 2 weeks, COVID-19 cases had more than doubled in 6 countries, namely Armenia, Azerbaijan, Belarus, Georgia, Russia, and Ukraine. The WHO's European region comprises 53 countries, including several in Central Asia. Klug lamented that vaccine uptake was still relatively slow in parts of the region. Less than 40% of over 60s have completed their COVID-19 vaccine series in Bosnia and Herzegovina, Bulgaria, Kyrgyzstan, Ukraine, and Uzbekistan. He added that in Bulgaria, Georgia, and North Macedonia, under 40% of healthcare workers had received at least 1 dose of a vaccine. He also stressed that in the face of an Omicron tidal wave and with Delta still circulating widely in the East, now was not the time or moment to lift measures that we know work in reducing the spread of COVID-19. These measures include avoiding crowded locations, wearing masks indoors, improving ventilation, and using rapid tests to identify cases early. Meanwhile, the Philippines is now at low risk from the coronavirus pandemic as more people get vaccinated and hospital admissions drop, according to President Duterte's spokesman today. The country last week reopened to foreign tourists for the first time in 2 years, though some health restrictions remain as campaigning for the May 9 election starts, with political rallies seen as potential superspreader events. Take a look.
Maliban sa aking mga nabanggit, iniulat din ni DOH Secretary Francisco Duque III na nasa 4 na rehiyon na lamang ang nananatiling nasa moderate risk, habang ang ating healthcare utilization rates ay nasa low to moderate risk levels.
Cases have averaged about 3,600 daily in the past week as the number of fully vaccinated people climbed to around 56% of the population, according to health officials. After lengthy lockdowns, which ravaged the economy and put millions out of work, the government is now planning for a lifting of all restrictions, according to Health Undersecretary Maria Rosario Vergere, telling this to reporters. Without giving a time frame, again, let's listen in.
We are preparing to transition already. So kung makikita po natin ngayon ang National Capital Region, if we use our metrics of case trends and healthcare utilization, low risk na po talaga ang NCR. Pero syempre, kailangan i-prepare po natin yung environment kung saan pag nag-ease tayo ng restrictions, it would be safe for our population, no? Pag lumabas na po sila. And that would be yung sinasabi po ni CABSEC na dapat lahat tayo magtutulong-tulong. Minimum public health standards pa rin foremost. Kailangan not just people, but also establishments, both public and private, should provide safe spaces for our people. So dyan mo papasok yung pagsunod din ng establishmento, pagsunod ng public spaces katulad ng mga sabihin natin churches, katulad po ng mga parks for example, katulad ng mga eskwelahan, nasusunod sila dun sa mga safety protocols na meron tayo katulad ng adequate ventilation, hand washing stations, compliant dapat sa pagbabakuna at saka compliant doon sa mga iba pang standards na atin pong pinapatupad. So ngayon po tayo po ay nasa alert level 2 in spite na pwede na mag-alert level 1 dahil naghahanda pa ho ang gobyerno kung paano po natin itatransition sa alert level 1 ang ating mga lugar so that lahat po tayo prepared kapag nagkaroon na tayo ng easing of restrictions.
Meanwhile, 2 Hong Kong hospitals began placing patients in beds outside their entrances as medical facilities struggle to cope with the city's worst coronavirus wave to date. Before the current outbreak, Hong Kong treated all coronavirus patients in dedicated isolation wards. But beds at hospitals and a temporary mass treatment facility near the airport have quickly filled up. The territory's leader, Carrie Lam, has nonetheless vowed to stick with the current zero-COVID approach, even as she rules out a mainland China-style hard lockdown. Lam said surrendering to the virus is not an option. She said authorities will continue to use smaller-scale district lockdowns with testing of all residents in housing blocks where cases are detected. In other news, the United Nations today urged Singapore to halt the imminent executions of 2 men held for drug offenses and furthermore end its use of the death penalty altogether. The UN Rights Office voiced alarm at the case of Posy Jeffredin and Roslan Bakar, who were both arrested in 2008 and convicted 2 years later on drug trafficking charges. The 2 men have been on death row for the past 12 years and were reportedly informed only last Wednesday that they would be executed 1 week later on February 16. UN Rights Office spokeswoman Ravina Shamdasani told reporters in Geneva that capital punishment was only permitted under international law for the most serious crimes, which is interpreted as crimes of extreme gravity involving intentional killing. Making matters worse in this case, Shamdasani said, were concerns that one or both men have intellectual disabilities. Amnesty International Singapore researcher Rachel Choa Howard agreed, saying the planned executions this week were appalling. To the U.S. now, where the Department of Agriculture said it had detected bird flu in 2 more farms after a first case came to light last week, putting the industry on guard. After having already detected the virus in wild birds on several occasions on the East Coast in recent weeks, the department said on February 9 it had found the disease in birds on a farm in Indiana. On Monday, it reported that 2 more farms had been affected in Kentucky and Virginia. The authorities have placed the sites in quarantine, and the birds will be slaughtered to avoid possible spread throughout the country, which, according to the USDA, is the largest producer of poultry in the world. No cases have been detected in humans so far, and the disease does not present an immediate public health threat, according to authorities. In other news, Ethiopia's parliament today lifted a state of emergency imposed last November when Tigrayan rebels threatened to advance on the capital, according to the foreign ministry. Take a look. The House of People's Representatives of Ethiopia has approved today the lifting of the 6-month state of emergency, according to the ministry on Twitter. The vote by lawmakers followed a proposal by Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed's cabinet last month to ease the state of emergency, which was initially supposed to last 6 months. The state of emergency was declared on November 2 after fighters from the Tigray People's Liberation Front, or TPLF, seized 2 crucial towns about 400 kilometers from Addis Ababa. The measure triggered mass detentions of ethnic Tigrayans in Addis Ababa and elsewhere, sparking condemnation from rights groups, including Amnesty International. And we'll be back with the business news right after this break. Stay tuned.
Alam namin ang iyong pagsisikap. Dama namin ang iyong mga sakripisyo. Kita namin ang pagharap mo sa bawat pagsubok. Kaya sa kabila ng mga hamon ng buhay, nandito kami para umalalay. Kasi katulad mo, gusto rin namin ang magandang bukas para sa kanya. Hatid namin ang dekalidad na edukasyon at makabagong pasilidad sa abot kayang halaga. Kaya huwag ka na mangamba. Sasamahan ka namin tuparin ang mga pangarap niya. Maaasahan mong sulit dito ang mga pinagsikapan mo. Sa aming mga makabagong pasilidad at sistema ng edukasyon. Mailalabas natin ang aking talino at mga kakayahan niya. Kahit sa munting halaga, makakasiguro ka na makakasabay siya sa mabilis na pag-ikot ng mundo. Sa New Era, karamay mo kami sa bawat hamon. Kaagapay mo kami sa bawat hakbang. Kasama mo kami sa bawat ngiti at tagumpay.
Welcome back. Mexican President Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador suggested Monday that economic and political interests were behind the United States' decision to suspend avocado imports from a major producing region. Again, let's listen in.
Hay también muchos intereses económicos, políticos, hay competencia. No quisieran que el aguacate mexicano, ¿no?, entrara a Estados Unidos o predominara por su calidad. En Estados Unidos hay otros países interesados, ¿no?, en vender el aguacate.
Came after a U.S. inspector who was checking export shipments in Mexico's western state of Michoacan received a threatening phone call, according to Mexican authorities and the U.S. Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service, or APHIS. The suspension came on the eve of the U.S. National Football League Championship game, a key marketing opportunity for Mexican avocado producers hoping to cement guacamole as a Super Bowl staple. Michoacan is the world's largest avocado producer, with 85% of its crop exported to the U.S. Last year, a group of avocado producers formed a self-defense group that they said was needed to prevent kidnapping, extortion, and theft by criminal groups. Lopez Obrador opposes such vigilante groups, saying they are often infiltrated by criminals. In 2019, the United States warned it was considering suspending purchases of Mexican avocados over the security situation in the country. In other news, Myanmar's junta on Tuesday dismissed Japanese drinks giant Kirin's decision to exit the country following a coup last year, saying it would be easy to substitute. Kirin on Monday became the latest foreign company to announce it was pulling out of Myanmar, following British American Tobacco and energy giants Total Energies and Chevron. It also said its decision came after months of wrangling following the February 2021 coup, which prompted the company to express concerns about human rights and eventually seek to end its involvement in Myanmar Brewery Limited. Human rights groups have pressed foreign companies to rethink their activities in Myanmar following the February 2021 coup and a subsequent crackdown which, according to local monitoring groups, has left more than 1,500 people dead. Meanwhile, Japan's economy rebounded to grow 1.3% quarter-on-quarter in the 3 months to December, driven by higher demand after emergency virus restrictions were lifted, according to data today. Here's Dennis Liu for the details. Dennis.
Data showed Tuesday that Japan's economy rebounded in the last part of 2021. As virus cases slowed and restrictions were eased, it spurred demand before the Omicron wave hit the country. The world's third largest economy grew 1.3% in the 3 months to December, rebounding from a revised contraction of 0.7% in the previous 3 months as virus cases surged. The quarter-on-quarter figure released by Japan's Cabinet Office Tuesday was slightly lower than market expectations of 1.5%. It was driven by a sharp recovery in spending after the lifting of emergency virus restrictions in October. The data also showed the economy grew 1.7% in real terms in 2021, the first annual expansion for the economy in 3 years. After a spike in virus cases in the summer of 2021, when Japan hosted the Olympics with virtually no spectators, the government lifted restrictions in October, prompting private consumption to grow 2.7% quarter-on-quarter. That growth is unlikely to have lasted, however, with a wave of Omicron cases spurring new restrictions in January. The restrictions, which mainly target nightlife and are far less strict than a blanket lockdown, will be in place until early March. Masamichi Adachi, UBS Securities chief economist for Japan, said self-restraint by consumers has been greater than expected and the pace of booster vaccinations is very slow. Still, he said they are expecting that the Japanese economy will resume a solid recovery this year after disappointing stagnation in 2021. He added that the timing of the rebound is just delayed. Tom Learmouth, Japan economist at Capital Economics, also said the road bump created by the Omicron variant would likely only temporarily derail growth. For 2021, The 1.7% expansion reversed the trend seen in both 2020 and 2019, with private consumption, including household spending, up for the year, despite the summer virus spike and emergency restrictions. Private non-residential investment was down, however, as a chip shortage and supply chain issues weigh on factory output. Last year, Japan's Prime Minister Fumio Kishida announced a record $490 billion stimulus to shore up the country's patchy pandemic recovery. But the effect of this spending is only likely to begin being felt from the first quarter of 2022, according to what The Economist said. This is the latest for now. Reporting from Tokyo, Japan, this is Dennis Liu. We live in interesting times.
And the news continues here on Eagle News. We'll be right back.
Hello everyone, my name is Andrew. I'm David. And we are Asper. Please catch us on Letters and Music, on air and online.
This coming Saturday, February 19, 1 to 2 p.m.
Only here on Net 25.
Welcome to Mobile Legends!
Ang Quezon City, sarap panoorin. Sa Quezon City, balay tawag gagawin. Kaya sa Quezon City Show, sumama na lahat tayo. Sa Quezon City, sa Quezon City. Kung ika'y lonely, wala kang magawa. Walang magawa daw, oh. Sa Quezon City, sa love trip ka matadapa. Kaya buksan ang TV nyo, sa Quezon City na tayo. Sa Quezon City, sa Quezon City. Buong pamilya, pati ang barkada. Kuya, ang inyong aso, pati inyong mga pusa. Magsama-sama tropa nyo, sa Quezon City na tayo. Sa Quezon City, sa Quezon City. Okay nga eh. Yun. Okay?
Time out muna sa hugutan!
Maglaro muna tayo ngayong linggo!
Tara game! Agad-agad!
With Agamulak!
Welcome back. Tabaso Galgalo has poured his life into his flock, but a spate of climate disasters in Kenya's northeast has decimated his livelihood. Now more than 2 million people face hunger. Take a look.
Disaster in northeast Kenya. Tabaso Galgalo lost many sheep and goats in months of drought. Then, flash floods decimated the rest.
This is a huge loss for the local community here because we have lost a lot of our livestock following this tragedy. If a person had around 500 goats before, they have between 20-25 goats left.
Nomadic livestock herders know how to cope with unpredictable weather patterns. But these days, the dramatic shifts are too much, even for them. The cattle that survive are too weak to milk and too thin to sell.
People relied on livestock to pay the school fees for their children. Providing food and clothing for the family also depended on livestock. Our livelihood. So many here have suffered a huge loss.
Last September, President Uhuru Kenyatta declared a state of natural disaster over the drought. The government spent almost $4 million to buy thousands of livestock from farmers in the worst-hit regions. Galgalo now works to save his remaining animals.
These herders have problems because even the livestock that remain alive seem to have been affected by the rains that killed the others. They are suffering from pneumonia and so are still dying.
The shifting weather may even affect peace in this region of Marsabit. There are already hostilities between tribes. Competition for ever scarcer resources may worsen the tensions.
The Atlantic Ocean advances an average of 6 meters or nearly 20 feet a year in Atafona, a small town north of Rio de Janeiro, which has long been prone to extreme erosion and now exacerbated by climate change. The sea has already submerged more than 500 houses, turning the once idyllic coastline into an underwater graveyard of wrecked structures. Take a look.
O mar, ele tá, como você está vendo aqui, né? Ele avançou de 15 dias para cá, ele avançou uns 3 a 4 metros em 15 dias, tá? Que é a maré também, né? Então a gente não sabe. Esse muro que está aqui, ele pode, semana que vem, não estar mais aqui. Né? Eu já estou providenciando já um aluguel de uma outra moradia para tirar minha família daqui, que eu também não posso botar eles em risco, tá?
Barco grande não entra mais aqui, está entrando em outros lugares, igual Macaé, Itaipava, para descarregar seu pescado, porque aqui não tem condições de entrar. E a economia vai para outro lugar, né? Porque ele descarregando aqui, o lucro fica aqui.
Uma construção de um quebra-mar ou de um dique de espigões pode transferir esse problema que a gente hoje acontece com a gente aqui para outro local. Então esse é o estudo a ser feito, tá? E até hoje não chegou a uma definição de qual seria o mais viável para a nossa região.
And finally, in our news, astronomy experts say they originally misread the secrets of the night sky last month. It turns out that a rocket expected to crash into the moon in early March was built by China and not SpaceX. A rocket will indeed strike the lunar surface on March 4, but contrary to what had been announced, it was built not by Elon Musk's company, but by Beijing, according to experts. The rocket is now said to be 2014-065B, the booster for the Chang'e 5T1, launched in 2014 as part of the Chinese Space Agency's lunar exploration program. The surprise announcement was made by astronomer Bill Gray, who first identified the future impact and admitted his mistake last weekend. NASA said in late January that it would attempt to observe the crater that will be formed by the explosion of this object, thanks to its probe that orbits around the moon, the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter, or LRO. The agency called the event an exciting research opportunity. And as always, I'll end the day on a thoughtful note. Our ability to look back and smile at our past is proof that God's plan is to keep us moving forward. This has been Eagle News International. I'm Alma Angeles. Stay alert and stay informed because we live in interesting times. Good night.